Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Keys to Recruiting High-Calibre Young Talent to Your Firm in the Digital Age. If you've not met me before, my name's Michael Carter, or MC. I'm the founder of Practice Paradox, and it's my pleasure today to be interviewing two of the innovators in the world of education and thought leaders. Today, I'll be speaking with TK Coleman and Bella Carter. TK Coleman is the Education Director at Praxis. And today you're going to learn about what Praxis does, but more importantly, get the context of the shifts that are happening in the education sector, in parts of the education sector, and the shifts that need to happen, not just in the education sector, but at your level, within your business, to change the way that you do recruit and attract people into your firm. And Bella Carter is the creative officer at Paradox, and Bella's also going to share her story about how Practice Paradox came to be collaborating with Praxis to change the way that the entrepreneurial community attracts more entrepreneurial talent to their business. G'day TK and g'day Bella.
Hi there. It's lovely to be here.
MC, I'm excited to be chatting with you today.
And for those that don't know, TK is sitting in California, in Los Angeles right now, and Bella and I are on the Sunshine Coast, so opposite sides and hemispheres of the globe. So thanks for setting aside the time, each of you. So TK, let's start with a simple, trivial question. What do you guys see as the purpose of education in this new era?
Yeah, that question is far from trivial, because how we answer that question, I believe, determines everything else. It determines all of the answers related to how we answer other questions. And for a very long time, a very narrow set of assumptions has dictated the way people typically answer that question. I mean, for many people, the answer to what's the purpose of education is, let's prepare young people for college so that they can get into a good college, and then college will prepare them for the real world. For some people, the answer to that question is make people, a good citizen, or make them well-rounded. So we study a little bit of math, a little bit of anthropology, a little bit of English, and all of the things that some narrowly defined group decides is important. For me, I think the purpose of education is a highly individualistic one that demands a highly individualistic answer. And that is, the purpose of education is to help the learner define what their goals are and learn the things they need in order to realize those goals. I believe that in a certain sense, schools ought to be just like yoga studios, right? You don't go to a yoga studio because someone is making you go. You go because you have a specific goal that you want to achieve. It's a voluntary experience. You're happy to go there. You're not celebrating when the yoga teacher cancels that session, right? You're happy to go there because you know you have a goal and they have expertise that's going to help you achieve that goal. And I believe there ought to be as many paths to learning as there are individuals, because everyone is free to decide what they want in life. There are some people out there, MC, as much as we hate it, who want to focus on being financially independent. That's what they care about, right? They want to focus on laying down a foundation for a successful career where they get to create a lot of wealth and have the experiences that come with that. And that's totally fine. And that might demand a very different kind of path than someone who just wants to realize their musical potential and not really think too much about matters pertaining to money. And both of those are valid. So we spent too much time asking educators this question, and I believe that we have to ask the learners that question, and the educator doesn't become relevant until the learner has decided for himself or herself what they want to learn and why they want to learn it.
One of our passions at Paradox is to help the accounting profession move from being a profession that is about reporting and compliance to being about leading and advising and helping people move. So one of the reasons we're so passionate about what you're doing with the team at Praxis is the accounting profession needs to start attracting, I think, a different breed of person, someone who really is focused on creating change and connecting and communicating, but within the context of this, what is now a complex digital world, the stack of apps that someone needs to learn when they come to a workplace now. is bewildering. So I'll just put a question to you, Bella, because you introduced Praxis to Practice Paradox, and we've now got Brad Matthews on our team, who's come through one of the Practice apprenticeships, and that's been wonderful. And so Brad is based in New South Wales in Australia. And to give everyone else another bit of context, Caitlin on our team is a current participant going through the Praxis program and apprenticeship with us. And she's based near Austin, Texas, in the United States. So it's a brave new world for all of us in business. So Bella, what was it that caught your attention initially? You've been a follower of TK's blog and the message that Praxis has. And yeah, so what was the thing that tweaked, and where do you see the real connection with what we're helping firms achieve?
Sure. Well, for those of you who don't know me, and that's most of you out there, 15 years ago, I was fortunate to be working in the world of education, and I was infusing best practice in education with innovation. So I was actually teaching preschoolers, and it was all through interest-led learning. And at the time, I was starting to experience as a teacher the changes happening in the education system, which was taking away children's ability to decide for themselves what they wanted to learn, and was doing the flip. So it's where we are now, where kids are told what they must learn. And at the time, I was searching for some way where I could continue to give children the opportunity to make decisions for themselves so that they could create the future that they want. Now, that was when I met TK Coleman. I actually found one of his blogs on Facebook, wonderful Facebook, tough-minded optimism it was, and it really spoke to me about all of these things. So at the time, I contacted TK, who was talking a lot about philosophy, and that was one of the things that I really infused into my world as a teacher for young children, is teaching them how to ask their own questions and seek their own answers. And that's something that the learner must know throughout their whole lives. It actually doesn't matter how old you are. So I actually messaged TK at the time and said, hey, what do you think about the fact that we really need this shift in education, and we need to start infusing philosophy into the everyday learning experience in schools? And that just basically sparked off an ongoing conversation between TK and I, which then led us to Praxis and what TK was doing with Praxis. And the relevance with accountants now is that it actually doesn't matter what field you are in. The way that the world has changed so much, and the shift has to go back onto the learner, is such that the current education system has schooled all of us into thinking there is only one way of doing things. And that's no different with accountants. So I've actually moved from the world of schooling, and 10 years ago I left the education system, and I've developed and run an entrepreneurial program for children in school. But then I've actually at the same time made the shift into the world of accounting with MC, with this digital marketing agency, because we see that there is a shift that is required within our arena of the accountants, and that they need, and that you accountants need, that help in making that paradigm shift where you're moving from being number crunchers to caring communicators. And that's why Praxis makes so much sense. Our experience with Praxis so far has been that the participants that we now have in our business are people who know how to create value, and they are real problem solvers, and they also know how to communicate. And that's what we feel is the next step for accountants.
Okay, well, before I pose another question to you, TK, in working, just to share with everyone, in working with accounting firms over more than 25 years now, it's so common, and I'll get anyone to click raise hand, any attendees in the webinar, if you've ever been disappointed with the practicality and the real world skills that you get with a graduate out of traditional university. The things that I've heard over the years is, wow, they've studied accounting for 3 or more years and they can't even do, you know, a bank reconciliation, or they don't understand some basic concepts, because the education system is focused on content regurgitation, which is just an obsolete concept these days, rather than problem solving, creativity, and innovation. But what I know is if each of us as employers waits for the traditional education system to make shifts, you might be moving into transition to retirement before you see any of those. It's going to take decades. And, you know, accounting as a profession, you can Google it, it's right up there in that top handful of professions that a lot of futurists feel is at most risk of digital disruption and automation. But so is the education sector. So TK, what are some of the shifts that you're seeing in the changes in that whole education space, and what you're doing at Praxis to change the skills and the mindset and the ability for young people to come into the workforce ready to add value compared to how things were just 5-10 years ago?
Absolutely. So, you know, one of the interesting things about the role of a degree, which is why maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, they were so valuable, is we didn't have a lot of ways to protect ourselves from the experience of wasting our time when we were looking for talent, right? Anyone who's in the business of trying to find talent needs some kind of filtering mechanism in order to be able to gauge credibility. And we really only have so many ways we can do that. Maybe someone I know recommends them, or maybe you have a degree from this particular institution that lets me know you've studied all the right things and so forth, because that's the only way to protect me from just anyone wasting my time by having me review an application or having me show up to interview them and so forth. So degrees have been very valuable for signaling people's credibility, so to speak. But now as technology expands, we have more ways of connecting with each other, more ways of signaling our ability to create value, more ways of taking initiative, launching creative projects, getting customers on our own, that the gatekeepers have come down. And this generation is able to do something in every arena that just wasn't possible 20, 30 years ago. Today, I can, no matter how horrible of a singer I am, MC, I can record an album using the tools on a basic PC. And no matter what you think of me, you can say, TK, this is terrible music. I can go straight to YouTube. I can go straight to iTunes. I can go straight to Podomatic, and I can let the people decide, right? Or, you know, I can decide to write all of my thoughts down, and I can be the worst writer in the world. And every publisher can say, this is nonsense. And I can go straight to Amazon, CreateSpace, or straight to Lulu, and I can let the people decide. And for the first time, we're able to go out there without the use of gatekeepers and make an effort to create value for people, to solve problems for people without anyone needing to give us permission. And this has opened the floodgate of possibilities. Yes, it also has, you know, saturated the market with all kinds of things that aren't very useful. But for the first time in history, we're now in a position to where if you have the ability to do something, you can actually demonstrate it publicly and win people's favor in a way that wasn't possible. So one great example of this is the story of Nina Airbnb. In fact, you can just go to ninaairbnb.com and you can see a very interesting story of a young lady who wanted a job with Airbnb, and the job wasn't available. It wasn't something, you know, that was being advertised. She simply was a big fan of the company, and she saw an opportunity to make their company better. And she put together this very elaborate and wonderful presentation that clearly showed that she did her research of all the different ways that she could create value for them. And, you know, she shared this online, and she was able to get an audience for her work that wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago. This thing went viral because it was such a great presentation that whether or not Airbnb liked it didn't even matter, because before it was over, she had tons of job offers from different people, right? This is the kind of thing that is possible in our era. And so I think the new approach to education is one that acknowledges what these tools have made possible. And it doesn't just leave it up to chance. It shows people how to use these tools to brand themselves, how to use these tools to market themselves and get out there and create value. Now we're at a stage where if your degree is the most important thing about you, then that's the only context in which it matters. But if you've done something that actually creates value for people, they don't really care about your degree. Think about it in a way that makes easy sense. Like, let's take Paulo Coelho, the author of The Alchemist. If he went on a talk show or if you interviewed him for your podcast, can you imagine how funny it would sound if someone said, today, our guest is Paulo Coelho, who has a degree in English literature from Appalachian State. I don't know where he went to school because just like you, I don't care, right? He's the author of the best-selling novel, The Alchemist. So once you've done something that actually creates value and moves people, that's when they stop caring about your college degree. And they only care about your degree is when you haven't done anything to signal value. But now we have that capacity. And the participants we work with in the Praxis program, we show them how to do this all the time. And we've had companies remove the college degree requirement because we've shown young people how to build a portfolio, how to create a body of work, how to go out there and get customers and do things for them without asking anybody for permission.
And this is one of the shifts that we're seeing, is that now each of us really, and I'm speaking here to a 15-year-old person, for example, out there in the real world. When Bella, you started teaching entrepreneurship in schools, one of the questions that came back from parents and some of the teachers were, well, what if you don't want to be an entrepreneur? And your response, which just makes utter sense, is it's not about whether you actually end up being an entrepreneur running your own business, but each of us needs entrepreneurial skills to add as much value as we can to whichever organization that we work for.
Can I say, it was actually that first question came from a 9-year-old, and his name was Ryder, and he's quite entrepreneurial, but he has made it perfectly clear to me, I don't want to be an entrepreneur. I love talking to video. I can help people create their videos. And so in that process that I had going with these 9 to 11-year-olds who were building businesses, each child was deciding on what role they would play and how they would create value within that setting. So Ryder became the go-to guy to create the promotional videos for all of the businesses that were being created by these children. And we had another child who was very clear again, I don't want to be an entrepreneur, I don't want to own a business, but his skill set was being extremely good at writing. And he then was getting paid by the other business owners, the kids, to write good copy for their blogs and for their promotional promotional gear. So that was a very clear distinction that came out of that, and an understanding that needs to be made for all people, the parents in particular, who are coming out of they're coming to an awareness and an unschooling of where they want their children to head. And I guess within the accounting profession, it's the same thing. It's like, TK, you said this to me years ago, begin with the end in mind. So if we're looking at our accountants and what they want to achieve within their firm, it's them asking themselves the question, begin with the end in mind, what is it that I want to achieve here? And who do I get to help me achieve this? So it's the entrepreneurial thinkers that you want.
And by the way, everyone, I'm just going to stop sharing the slide, and that will make our webcam views larger. And in Zoom, in the top right-hand corner, you can change your view between speaker view and gallery view. Bella, just to touch on that, I remember the very first conversation we had, and part of it went for a while, I just sat there and listened to you, was the fact that the education sector was this was how many years ago? 15 years ago. Education sector was so off base, focusing on standardized testing and content regurgitation of facts, and governments mistakenly are seeing these rankings. So it's all driven by the politicians and it's all driven by the polls, which is why we need to re-educate society gradually. You know, standardized test results are not going to build competitive advantage for a nation, for a region, for a business. What is going to build competitive advantage is innovation, which is the fancy trendy way of just saying novel solutions, coming up with different ways of solving old and new problems. So with Praxis, TK, what are some of the things, and by the way, let's maybe give everyone an overview. We've mentioned Praxis, of what Praxis is and how it works, so they can see how it really is creating a bridge and I think a pathway for young people to upskill rapidly and become incredibly valuable for modern employers.
Absolutely. So I can interweave that into what Bella just talked about and the question you just posed prior to that. So in a talk that I gave about Praxis at a Voice and Exit conference a couple of years ago called Education 2.0, I made a distinction between being an entrepreneur and being entrepreneurial. And I defined being an entrepreneur in the traditional sense, being someone who owns a business, being someone that founds a startup, whereas being entrepreneurial is about approaching your work with a sense of artistry and ownership. It's about adopting a non-permission based approach to creativity, where you say, I am going to solve problems and I am going to add value to people's lives, not by sitting around and waiting for someone to tell me what to do, right? But by taking ownership of the results I want to create and by being an artist in my work, regardless of the label that I wear. And I would contend that whether you want to be an entrepreneur or not, you cannot have a future if you're not willing to take ownership of the creative process as it expresses itself in your own life. The world is becoming an increasingly smaller and smaller place for people who simply want to be given a map and be told what to do. All of the interesting places to go in life, all of the valuable work to do in life only remains for those people that are willing to take the risk of creating their own maps. That's scary, that's frightening, but it's a really awesome, exciting opportunity. And we work in the realm of showing people how to do that. I mean, as a business owner, MC, you can appreciate a person that knows how to follow instructions, a person that can come in and do exactly what you told them to do. But on the flip side, that's also kind of a weakness. If you can't go beyond that, that's kind of a weakness. The person who does really well in school is the person who can read a book, understand it, and regurgitate knowledge once I do the hard part as a teacher, which is tell them what book to read. But what happens in the real world when you have a problem and you don't know what book out there is going to solve that problem? Now there's no one to assign it to you. Which book do you pick? What parts of the book do you pay attention to when there's no test guaranteeing you a good grade, if you emphasize those parts? Or is a book the best way to go about obtaining this knowledge? Those are the kinds of decisions that have to be made in the real world. And those are the valuable kinds of decisions. Now, segue into what we do with Praxis. We teach young people how to create value in the real world. Our stated mission is we help people discover and do what makes them come alive. But here's the problem. Everybody's saying that. Everybody talks that way. If you own an Instagram account, or if you've ever been on Pinterest for 2 seconds, or if you go on Twitter or Facebook, what do you see? A plethora of inspirational quotes appealing to people's need to live meaningful lives or find work they're passionate about. One of my favorite quotes is by Howard Thurman, and he says, ask not yourself what the world needs, but rather what makes you come alive, for that is what the world needs, people who have come alive. Now, 15, 20 years ago, I may have quoted that, and you may have said, oh, wow, that's an interesting idea. Not today. You've probably seen that 50 times on Facebook alone today, right? This is the age of creating pretty little pictures with inspirational quotes. And so now the world is filled with people whose minds have a ton of prescriptive knowledge or theoretical knowledge about what they're supposed to do, what they should feel guilty about not doing. And everybody knows that they ought to work harder, or that they ought to create value, or that they ought to exercise more, or that they ought to do something they're passionate about. But what's lacking is someone who can come in and demonstrate the nuts and bolts. How do we move from prescriptive knowledge and awareness of what we ought to do or how we ought to be to strategic knowledge, the actual tools, mastery over the tools that can help me move an idea from concept to completion, mastery of the tools that can help me actually get things done in a way that makes someone beg to pay me? Because that's what you do when you go to the mechanic, right? You don't like them, you don't trust them, but you beg them to take your money. Why? Because that mechanic is doing something that's really valuable. How do you help people translate inspirational knowledge and prescriptive knowledge into that kind of practical skill? And the way we do that is we change the conversation around where education happens. We take it from the classroom into the work world, because that is where learning has to take place. And it's something that we've all known ever since we were children. How do you learn how to speak? How do you learn how to be in a relationship? How did you learn how to raise your kids? How do you learn how to sell a product? How do you learn how to respond to a human being when they're angry at you? Not by reading about it, not by hearing someone lecture you about it, but by actually being in the situation, taking risk, looking at the feedback you get from your failure, revising, and then trying again. And after you do that, that's when the lectures and the books become useful to you, because it's embellishing knowledge that is being transferred to you by experience. So what we do at Praxis is we provide people with a context where real skills are developed, where real risks are taken, and where real value is being created. They don't demonstrate their knowledge by taking tests, but by satisfying customers. It's a 12-month apprenticeship program. They come in with us and they do 6 months of an entrepreneurial boot camp where they learn the basics of how to think of themselves as a professional brand, how to market themselves, how to develop their skills and so forth, and doing portfolio projects, building up a body of work. And then after that 6 months, they're placed with one of the companies in our network, and they do a 6-month apprenticeship. They're paid for the work, and when they're done, 98% of our participants get job offers, and the average salary is $50,000. And the reason that is because they're not just reading things, they're not just listening to things, they're actually developing the skills in the real world, and they're learning how to take ideas to make other people's lives easier. So that's how we're doing it, and that's how it relates to this philosophical stuff that we're talking about, man. We're in the business of taking all this abstract stuff and making it concrete, because that's the thing that no one's doing. I mean, you can get a self-help book really easily. You can find someone to motivate you about what you ought to do really easily, but how do you make it happen within the context that is your life? That's what we show people.
You've reinvented the apprenticeship, because isn't it? It's fascinating to us that the current education system is still based in a way that was dealing with industrialization. Was preparing people to follow instructions in factories, and the education system is still working like that. Whereas prior to that, prior to sitting everyone in rows and looking at someone talking at them, that people did learn by doing, the master and apprentice. So you've kind of, this is just my sort of take on Praxis, is it's apprenticeships wrapping around it real world development around philosophical, strategic, entrepreneurial thinking and digital skills, like the skills that you want in a young person coming into your business.
So one thing I want to add to that too, though, because context is very important. It's not just about zooming in on a particular set of skills and looking at that as the golden ticket. It's about emphasizing where those skills have to be learned in order for true development to take place. So one thing I like to say is this, is if the practice isn't real, then the progress won't be real as well. So let's take something like public speaking, for instance. You can practice in front of me, you can stand in front of the mirror, but the incentives don't truly kick in until you go in front of a crowd and you risk putting your foot in your mouth, right? Because when you go stand in front of a crowd and your mind goes blank or you make a mistake, the cost is real. You actually lose something. You feel some real embarrassment. There's something at stake. I mean, there's actual evidence that your brain processes information differently when you have stake in the game. So writing in a diary, for instance, is very different from blogging publicly every day, because there's a risk associated with blogging publicly every day. You can be ignored. You can be misunderstood. You can make someone angry at you, or people can love what you're doing and praise you. Like, the possibility of feedback is real. And you can't get that at school when you write a paper and someone is paid to pay attention to that paper, whether it's worth reading or not, and they're going to give you feedback. In the real world, you don't get an F, you get ignored.
Exactly.
So it's the incentive structure, because people respond to incentives, right? That's the basic lesson of economics. Like, you got to educate people in the context where when they win something, they really win something. No fake money, no fake prizes, real money, real social capital, real prizes, real losses, real rewards. That's when people step up. Right now, most students in traditional schooling, even the ones who are really good, they don't know how to respond to anything other than being given artificial prizes that aren't reflected by anything in the real world, or being given artificial threats that don't correspond to anything in the real world. I mean, even the notion of taking a test, I call that the interrogation model of knowledge demonstration. I mean, the only context within which you will ever be called upon to demonstrate what you know where someone says, prove to me that you didn't lie when you said you read this book, is if the police are interrogating you. And you know, that hopefully that's a rare experience for all of us, right? In the real world, you have to take that knowledge and you have to find a problem that a person has, a problem that they often don't even know they have, and you got to show them how what you know can fix that for them. You know,
it blows me away that the recruiting industry still by and large is based around employers looking at CVs and doing interviews. Like, you know, surely the proof of the pudding is actual competency, actually doing things in the context, in the environment of a business, which is one of the great things that we've loved about Praxis, is having participants in the program actually do work, contribute to what it is that we create at Paradox. So we're not kind of hoping and guessing that, oh, gee, that was a really good interview performance. Like, interviewing, like, really? Like, what a dumb way to recruit staff. There's a lot of data around that, you know, competency testing is way at the top of being a reliable predictor of someone's success in a role. But one topic that is in the media on virtually a daily basis is digital disruption. Digital disruption, and the media loves it because it's got the fear element to it, which sells papers and gets eyeballs and ears on the radio. And one of the things that's often talked about is this whole idea that, you know, 60%, 80%, whatever the percentage is, of current jobs that we're training our children for in school won't even exist X years into the future. You got a great reframe, TK. What's your view on digital disruption per se?
Yeah, it certainly is becoming increasingly more arrogant to assume that you know, the plans that we make for today and the things that we learn today are going to be relevant 5-10 years from now. I mean, I'm at the age where most of my friends now are having children, and it's interesting to hear people say when they have a child, one of the first things they start to talk about is saving up for college. And I think to myself, my gosh, I have no clue what the world is going to look like in 18 years, right? You know, so the indoctrination definitely runs deep with that. But, you know, I think the answer to this is related to something you just said. You talked about how even in the accounting world, we still kind of rely on these kind of outdated methods to find talent. Well, I don't think that's because people are crazy. I don't think that's because people are arbitrarily stubborn. As a student of economics, I believe in rational choice theory, that even when people seem irrational to me, their behavior corresponds very strictly to some kind of internal logic. They make sense to themselves. And if I can understand that, I might be able to negotiate with them more effectively, reason with them more effectively, not flawlessly, but it certainly improves my ability to communicate with them. And one thing I find is that when a terrible thing is the best option available, well, people don't apologize for doing a terrible thing. And it's not because they're terrible people, right? And so for many people, this is still the best way available for them to figure out if you're worth their time or not. But here's what technology is doing to make the world more competitive. Technology is saying, hey, if you have some talent, you have an indefinite number of ways to showcase that talent to the world and to help people without going through any gatekeepers. So you take something like Quora, for instance, you know, there are people out there who have lots of knowledge, and because maybe they don't have the right credentials or they grew up on the wrong side of the tracks, no one respects them for any superficial reasons, but they have the ability to go on Quora and answer questions that are being raised in that community and have their answers upvoted. And if people in the community like their answers, they upvote that person, and that person has a track record of giving really valuable answers, and they have a reputation of being someone that gives really high quality advice. And once you have, you know, 1,000 people saying you're really good at what you do, doesn't really matter anymore if you don't have a degree from someplace. I actually had a Praxis graduate get a job because the person who was considering hiring them listened to a podcast interview. They wanted to know if that person had the ability to intelligently communicate their ideas, if they had the ability to effectively sell people because of the kind of position they would be in. And when they listened to that podcast, that's what they needed. But maybe you didn't have that 15, 20 years ago. But consider what happens when more people adopt that entrepreneurial mindset and they say, you don't have to wait for a job interview to know what I sound like when I talk, to know how I communicate ideas, you can click on this link and go listen to me talk to 20 experts in my industry, and you can see what my question asking skills are like for yourself. And that's powerful, man. And that's what technology is doing.
And I've heard you use the phrase, TK, digital liberation rather than digital disruption. And what you're describing there is it is a form of liberation, isn't it? For people have no limits in terms of the reach and making progress with their life in general, but specifically today we're talking about their career.
Absolutely. Like, technology is not just changing the world that we're trying to prepare for, but it's also changing the way in which we signal to the world the existence of that preparation. And that, to me, is where all the excitement happens, you know.
Absolutely. So to give us, the guys who are either with us live or watching the recording of this an idea, with Praxis, and that's discoverpraxis.com, being based in the US, people might be sitting in Australia or New Zealand or the UK or the US and wondering, can it work for me in my country? To share with everyone before we touch on that, my understanding is, I think Practice Paradox, Bella, is that correct, did the first apprenticeship through Praxis in Australia. And even though the organizations are in different countries, we were able to have Brad come through an apprenticeship, Brad being based in New South Wales, as I mentioned earlier, and he now works for us as part of our geographically distributed team, works remotely, and that's worked really well. So how does it typically work for people, whether they're in the US or not, in terms of candidates and finding people that can add value to their business? What's it look like?
Yes, so as participants are moving through the entrepreneurial boot camp, where they're developing their brand, building their body of work by working on portfolio projects within their existing wheelhouse, and also learning new skills in the process, we begin that process of matching them up with businesses based on their particular set of strengths, weaknesses, interests, and so forth. And we have our participants interview with prospective business partners that we think they'd be a good fit for. And we only have a match if both parties are excited about working with each other. So we don't do it based on assignment. We don't bully people and say, this is the company that you need to work with, because we understand if people don't believe in it for themselves, they won't be highly motivated. And we don't just tell our business partners, this is a Praxis participant and you've got to take them. We give them the opportunity to look at several different Praxis participants. And we have a pretty efficient process. So before they even sit down to interview with a participant, they're able to look at the pitch decks for those participants. They're able to look at the portfolios and the websites of those participants and get an awful lot of knowledge about them. And if there is one or two that they're interested in, we arrange an interview. And if for both parties it's a good match, then they actually begin their apprenticeship. But that's a little bit about how we go about the process of setting up that match. And while participants are in the placement process or going through that boot camp, every other week, they're able to have a one-on-one session with one of our Praxis advisors. And the people in our advising staff, they are entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial. They're living in the real world, the very philosophy that we're teaching our participants. And they help coach those participants not only on, the things they need to do to succeed in the placement process, but the things they need to do to succeed once they begin working at that business partner as well. So one of the things that we tell the companies in our network is, when you hire a Praxis participant, you're not just hiring somebody that we believe is a good worker right now, but you're hiring someone that's committed to a process of professional development for the entire time they're in this program. They're going to be regularly meeting with entrepreneurs and getting coached by them. They're going to be doing professional development projects where they complete deliverables every single month. They're going to be learning new skills and mastering new skills every single month. And then in addition to that, they're going to be participating in weekly skills workshops where they're learning new things from business owners and so forth. So the person you hire today is going to be very different from that person 4 months from now, because they're not just showing up, clocking in, clocking out. They're committed every day to doing things to get better.
So the participants are being mentored by Praxis, and in the work environment when they move to the stage of being, working within an organization. So that's brilliant, because each of us as employers need to mentor and coach our team members. at all times ongoing, particularly when they're new. But the fact that Praxis has a structured program to do that in a very systematic way as well, just dramatically up skills. Well, it's not, skills probably not even the right word. It's more mindset as well as skills, I think, preparing them to work and collaborate in the environment. Earlier, TK, before we went live, we were having a chat about how you've extended out the program a little bit in terms of number of months because of your commitment to making sure to the business partners, the employers, that people do arrive with the skills and using the modern tools. What were some of those tools that you mentioned these days that it's a classic example of, I think many of us have said and often say, gee, that's a skill that should be taught in school, or gee, that's a skill that should be taught in university, but sadly, so many things are not. What are some of those, I think you ran through some apps and things that you consider, look, if you're a modern knowledge worker, that you just need to know these things.
Sure. You know, so a lot of these tools vary from company to company. So what we do with our participants is once they're placed, or we at least have it narrowed down to the point where we know it's going to be within this small range of options, we begin working with them on mastering whatever software stack is most valuable to that company. And we have our business partners provide that kind of information for us. So, you know, for instance, if you work at Praxis, you have to know the basics of how to use Salesforce, how to use HubSpot, how to use Slack, how to use Workplace, how to use Voxer, these kinds of tools, because this is how we communicate with one another. This is how we manage our knowledge, how we track data within the organization. And this is true of every company, right? And you can't know what exactly you should study ahead of time. Now, I actually have a very different philosophy than what I call the golden ticket approach of traditional education, where you take coding, for instance. Coding is all the rage. People look for that one golden ticket. You know, if I learn this, I can guarantee myself success forever. You know, and I don't think that's the best way to approach it. I actually think business owners are much less concerned about that than they are about seeing a track record of your ability to master new tools and use them within the context of value creation. So MC, let's say you're interviewing me for a job and I say to you, you say to me, all right, TK, what kind of skills do you have? And I say to you something like, well, MC, at the beginning of the year, I didn't know anything about task management. So I mastered Trello and Asana so that I can become really organized at tracking my task. If you look at my blog post here on January 1st, you can see that I began a professional development project of learning how to use those two tools. By the time I was in month 3, I had mastered those tools. I created a tutorial for other people so that they can learn how to use them as well. Secondly, I also taught myself HTML. As you can see here on my blog, I didn't know that, a couple of months ago, but I taught myself the basics of HTML. And as you can see, according to this link here, I built my own WordPress website. In addition to that, I didn't know anything about Salesforce. Here's some evidence showing you what class I took, what I built using my knowledge from Salesforce, and what I can do now. Even if you don't use those tools, I can now sell you on the fact that I have the ability to go from not knowing something, learning something, and using that knowledge to create value for other people. In a world where everyone says in a job interview, I'm creative and I work hard, the ability to actually substantiate that claim with specific, well-documented examples and references is a huge differentiator. And hardly anyone is able to do that. All of our participants are able to do that. So we encourage people to not get so stuck on what that one skill is, because if you can show your ability, if you can demonstrate your ability to show up, be consistent, be reliable, be on time, work within a system, get stuff done, that there's a place for that anywhere, So that's my take on it, as opposed to learning, figuring out what's the one thing you need to learn.
Utterly transferable skills, and that's one of your passions, Bella, isn't it? Oh, and by the way, before I go on, just to mention to everyone, you'll see in the corner of your screen a Q&A button. Feel free to ask questions to any one of us, and we'll move into question time shortly. But Bella, part of your passion around being a change agent in the education sector is to move away from content being the focus to learning how to learn, that metacognition aspect. Yeah. You'd like to comment on that?
Sure. You know, we're in an age of people disruption. Digital disruption has been going on for a while, and it'll always be there. And it's like TK's saying, it's actually a great thing, because it's the person who can actually see the opportunities that exist due to digital disruption that will move forward and will create the life that they want for themselves. So when we come back to the world of education, instead of seeing people, children and adults, as empty vessels that we just dump information into, if we instead provide a framework like Praxis, where we're saying you actually have the ability to learn, and that they see themselves as learners and see themselves as the people in control of whatever it is they choose to learn in any given moment, then that is the differentiator for sure. So I am 100% behind TK in that. We can be doing that with preppies. It actually doesn't matter what age you are. You can be 98. I decided to learn piano at the age of 43. I'd never ever learned to read piano in my life. It's something I've always wanted to do. I finally went, right, that's it, I'm going. So I went to a piano teacher. I said, teach me how to learn piano properly. I want to do I want to learn to read notes. I don't want you just to teach me how to play a song. I want to be able to read the music and do it well. And it was the best thing for me to make that shift, because I was schooled into thinking you can only learn at school, and by the time you hit a certain age, that's it. This is what you've created for your life. But what I learned in that moment is, no, I'm a lifelong learner. I will not stop learning until the day I die. So at the age of 43, I turn up for piano lessons every single week. I actually discovered I have a natural talent for piano, and I was learning to read classical music. And there were people there who'd been learning for 2 years, and they were in their 80s, and they were like me. They'd never learnt how to play piano. They'd never learnt to read music. They were reciting the most exquisite compilations of classical music and doing it very, very well in their 80s. So that's just the proof in the pudding. It's just a mindset shift. It's really quite simple if we just make that shift to move from this whole idea that digital disruption is replacing us, to instead, well, I'm a person who can see opportunity and I can act on it, and I will act on it. And I will show myself first and show the rest of the world what I can do in any given moment. That is the differentiator.
Absolutely. And, you know, within the context for accounting, oh, sorry, you go, TK.
I was going to piggyback off that. I'll wait, or we can move on.
Oh, no, you piggyback, because I was just going to put in the context of building competitive advantage for accounting firms. But you go.
So to add to what Bella said, let's take a look at what that kind of learning looks like in the value creation mindset, because this is the thing that's absent in most conventional approaches to education. There's just emphasis on learning things, but not approaching this, with that marketplace mindset, with that entrepreneurial mindset. So two things. One, a lot of people are great learners, but they're not good at taking themselves seriously as a personal brand. And so they miss out on one of the most important aspects of learning, which is letting other people be a part of your learning process. You know, the tricky thing about knowledge is that once you have it, nobody knows anything about how you got it. And they can only be impressed by what you do with it. However, if you allow people to become a part of that learning process, they learn something new about you that isn't revealed by mere competence alone. So let's say Bella starts a blog on day one of her piano project, and she says, today, I know nothing about piano and I'm 43 years old, but I am gonna figure this out. So I'm gonna spend the next 30 days learning proper fingering techniques, learning my scales, and then for month 2, I'll move on to chords. And every day or every week, she records a video or she writes a blog post letting us know what her struggles were, letting us know what she achieved, letting us know what she's gonna work on next week. I'm going to find something about her that's very important, you know, especially if I want to be a customer, or if I'm looking for a teacher, or I'm looking to hire someone. If she shows up and does this consistently for 4 months, I'm going to say, wow, Bella is a really efficient, disciplined, committed, focused learner. she's the kind of person I want working with me, or the kind of person that I want teaching me. Now, if she just keeps this process a secret and then surprises me at the Christmas party with her piano skills, I'm going to be impressed, and I'm going to say, oh, wow, that's great. And then I'm going to do something to her that everybody does when you demonstrate knowledge. I'm going to assume that she was just gifted by God. I'm going to assume that she's one of the lucky ones who happens to know how to play piano. But if she takes that other approach that I just talked about, she's actually improved her personal brand, and she's made opportunities available. The second component of that is seeing yourself as a value creator with every bit of knowledge that you have. Many people are just kind of stuck in the preparation mindset where it's like, okay, keep learning for 10 years, then I'll give you a degree. And once you've reached a certain level of competence, then you have permission to go out there and maybe teach someone else. But no, if you've learned something, that means you have the ability to teach something to someone else. Like, well, if you started learning the piano at 43 years old, think of how many people are 40 who actually have had that conversation with themselves. Like, I love to learn an instrument, but it's too late now. And what they would hear from you that they wouldn't hear from someone that's 20. Thinking of yourself as a personal brand allows you to capitalize on those kinds of opportunities. And when I say capitalize, I don't mean selfishly exploit other people. I mean create real value for people in a way that nobody else is doing. There's opportunity there for you and everyone else.
Fantastic. In a moment, we'll go to questions. So guys, if you've got any questions, just click the Q&A button in the top left corner of your screen. And I'll just share my screen again and share a couple of things. But before we go into that, you know, from your perspectives, and I'm speaking to everyone listening now, as an accounting and business advisory firm, in terms of creating strategic advantage within your marketplace, it's not going to be done by the next piece of software you subscribe to, because all of that software is available to everyone. It is not going to be done by recruiting in the same way that all the other accounting firms are recruiting, because I know for a fact that most accounting firms look for 5 years experience and, you know, reasonable salary. Oh, who doesn't want someone who can hit the ground running because they've got 5 years experience in another firm, and then you can hire them. So, you know, that's like thrashing about in the bloodied waters of competition, to quote the metaphor out of the brilliant book, Blue Ocean Strategy, which is, you know, find a patch of blue ocean, because the ocean's really large. So don't thrash about where competition is, where everyone is looking to compete in the same way. Do things differently, innovate. And I think your recruiting is one of the biggest opportunities. Quick story. A firm in Newcastle, they're one of our poster children, we call them, because they've just been so successful under our guidance, is GrowthWise. So Steph Hines at GrowthWise was one of the first graduates of our teachings, where we teach people marketing strategy and modern marketing methodology and framework. And one of Steph's best team members, Daniel, I believe his name is, started with the firm when he was 15 and is still with the firm now in his early 20s. Imagine having someone in their early 20s who has 6-7 years experience working in an accounting business advisory firm. Gold. Now, here's the key around that is you're not going to do that with traditional recruiting. It's just never going to happen. The very first presentation I ever did, I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was in a boardroom at a firm of about 30 people. And I explained the people paradox. And if you Google the people paradox, I've got a blog post on this topic. And here's one of the major endemic problems that are holding back the potential that the accounting profession has to be a catalyst for societal change for good. So you heard me right. I believe that the accounting profession has an opportunity to be a catalyst for societal change for good, because you are, if you take the opportunity, at the core of the entrepreneurial small business community. You, in your role, can affect hundreds and thousands by ripple effect of people by serving small business families. But to make that shift, you've got to start recruiting differently, because imagine this. A high school student goes to their career guidance counselor, and the career guidance counselor looks at their scores, their grades, puts them through some aptitude tests. And, you know, the conversation with the student goes something like this. gee, what I really get from you, your strengths are in communicating and building rapport and connecting with people. You know, you're a real thinker. You think outside the square. You know what? I think you should be an accountant. Now, it doesn't happen, does it? The conversation more likely goes, oh, you're good with numbers. You're highly analytical. You should be an accountant. Now, that's a massive problem. That's a massive problem for the accounting profession, because within the model of minders, grinders, finders, and reminders that you'll see in that article, so it's minders, grinders, finders, and reminders. It's on two continuum. One is people. There are some people that gravitate towards people, and others gravitate towards a task list. And on another spectrum, some people want to be told what to do, and so they just ask, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? Otherwise known as order takers. And there are people that are happy to assert their opinion and give advice. They're happy to tell. Now, grinders will gravitate towards a task list and gravitate towards being told what to do. Now, grinders, the skill of grinding is a commodity. It is currently being outsourced to low labor centers in the world, and it's gradually, the more progressive firms are actually automating large aspects of it now. We're not talking about some futuristic concept. This is happening now. So grinding, it's being highly analytical order taker, a reactive person. Your days are numbered in the profession. But if you as a firm develop your own skills and start to attract people that are people, that are the communicators and the connectors, you really as an advisory firm are putting yourself in a position to just stand out in your patch of blue ocean, where you are something different. You're actually an accounting firm that is leading your clients, not just reporting back to your clients. And I think that's a really exciting place to be, but it's not going to happen for you if you keep recruiting the way that traditional firms recruit, because you're just going to get what you've always got if you keep doing what you've always done. So in closing, in terms of, if any questions come through, that's all good. TK, in terms of people getting in touch with Praxis, the website I've got on screen now is discoverpraxis.com. Plenty of information there. And the For Businesses page here is where you used the term a few times earlier, TK, of business partners. Can you give everyone an insight as employers and entrepreneurs, what is a business partner and what's the sort of commitment and any costs for that?
Sure. So we don't charge people to be our business partners. The reward is big enough by having them satisfied with the work that our participants do. The commitment is, they commit to offering these full-time positions available and, paying the Praxis participants for their work. And if you want to contact me, we can talk more specifically and directly about that. But this is a great way for you to get a chance to preview talent, to work with talent before making hiring decisions. You can go look for talent through traditional recruiting, or you can work with someone that's committed to this process of professional development in the way that we provide. And one of the great things about working with us is that we do at the very least a monthly check-in. Our participants, they meet with their advisors. They have weekly interaction with some advisor or other. But then in addition to that, we do a check-in with our business partner at least every month. Some of them like to talk to us more, and we update them on what their particular participant is working on this month, what they worked on last month, how they're growing, and we give them the opportunity to outsource any training to us, any challenges to us. So if they need to see more or less of something from our participants, whether it's related to a soft skill or a hard skill, we can customize the curriculum experience to begin working with that participant on it. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can check us out at discoverpraxis.com/partners. You can email me directly at tk@discoverpraxis.com, and I'd be happy to discuss that with you. Right now, geographically, most of our work is done in the States, but we definitely have lots of participants who do remote work, and we're always looking to take a look at any opportunities that, where there seems to be mutual benefit. So definitely reach out to me. I'll be happy to talk with you if you're interested in getting some awesome talent.
And, from our own personal experience at Paradox, we couldn't recommend the Discover Praxis process any more highly, which is why we're having and sharing this conversation with TK and with Bella today. So you can see on screen, everyone, there's TK's email address, tk@discoverpraxis.com. discoverpraxis.com/partners is where you can fill in the form and have a chat with the guys. But here's something that's very, very easy for you to do as well. Bella and I absolutely love every single piece of content that Praxis publishes, modern day philosophers. So I recommend you do a few things. Look up tkcoleman.com for TK's blog and follow that. Subscribe to TK's passionate musings, and also do a search in LinkedIn on Discover Praxis as a company and follow Praxis. And that way you're in the loop with really what is the latest thinking in modern education for the benefits society as a whole, employers and the candidates. It's just everyone wins. So TK, thanks so much for setting aside time today and also in preparing for today. And thank you to Bella for being the catalyst for Praxis and Practice Paradox to be working together. It's been a great ride and will continue on for decades.
Always good to chat with you. I look forward to the next time.
Okay, bye for now. Thanks everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Cheers.
See you next time.